Before there was a growing fear of loot boxes and microtransactions, game companies will still occasionally let us down from time to time. And as we move into a new decade of gaming with new hardware, new games, and new services all competing for our time, attention, and money, let's take a moment to look back over the last decade and remember some of the biggest moments we wish we could forget in gaming. Now don't worry, it's not all bad news, as there has been so many great games over the last 10 years. We're going to be sure to highlight some of those for these different years as well. Plus, if you'd like to see the best games of the last decade video, be sure to hit that like button. If we can hit some kind of crazy number, let's say 1,000 likes on this video, we'll be sure to release that for you guys here as well. So let's go ahead and buckle up and jump back into the start of this decade to the year 2010. So 2010 was a really great year for me as a Final Fantasy fan, but yet at the same time, a little bit disappointing. We've got Final Fantasy XIII and Final Fantasy XIV on this list, taking the top spot for 2010. Now, while Final Fantasy XIII was definitely commercially successful and enjoyed by many fans of the franchise, over time, that enjoyment quickly faded. And overall, it really ended up spinning up multiple sequels to really try to flesh out its story that it was ultimately trying to tell. For many, this ended up being a moment when they had them asking themselves what's actually wrong with Final Fantasy and were its best years behind them. At the same time, you have the release of Final Fantasy XIV 1.0. And while the best news here is this is a great story overall, because now here in 2019, it's one of the top rated games, especially MMOs, on the market today. When it was released, obviously, it didn't land. In fact, it actually had good sales, considering, but it was quickly and painfully clear that this game was not ready for prime time, and it caused Square Enix to have to do a lot of rethinking. Ultimately, these two games have actually led to better Final Fantasy games because of how they released in 2010. Now, some highlights of good games this year were Super Mario Galaxy 2, Mass Effect, Red Dead Redemption, and what's also contrasting to Final Fantasy XIV was the release of World of Warcraft Cataclysm, which was hailed really excitedly at the time, but obviously in retrospect, a lot of people say this was kind of the death knell, the beginning of WoW's decline. Okay, so now let's go from 2010 to 2011, and we really only have one highlight here for you guys. If you can remember or try to forget, Duke Nukem Forever. Now, we didn't really expect good things for this game. We didn't expect it to be good, but ultimately, with over a decade of hype and work and drama behind getting this game released, it's hard not to list this game as a part of 2011's biggest disappointments. So let's go ahead and go from 2011 to 2012 now. We've got two games and a system here for you guys today. If you guys can remember or try to forget, Resident Evil 6 and Mass Effect 3. And while Mass Effect 3 actually received great critical praise, it did really well, ultimately, a lot of fans look back at how this game concluded, and that's why it actually makes the list. It reviewed well, it sold great, but then you also have stories where people were spending over $15,000 on in-game microtransactions through the multiplayer version of this game. This ultimately sets up a lot of things that we're frustrated about in the future, and so being that people and players felt that it didn't live up to their response or their hope for the series overall and how it concluded, that's why it's on the list. But at the same time, it also is a part of one of the best games released in 2012, along with Persona 4 and The Walking Dead, Xenoblade Chronicles, and Borderlands 2. So a lot of really good stuff in 2012. Now, Resident Evil 6 really kind of released to mixed reviews, but ultimately it left players wondering if Resident Evil 6 had lost its way, saying, like, how is this a Biohazard game? What is going on with Resident Evil 6? And so it's made our list for 2012. Now, we have a console release here for you guys, if you can remember or try to forget, the Wii U. Now, beyond marketing confusion for the Wii U, as a follow-up to the successful Wii, and while the Wii U ended up having an incredible library of games, ultimately it was surpassed within the first year of the Nintendo Switch's life, and with most of those games making their way over to the Nintendo Switch, it's really exciting to see that the Wii U and the best of the Wii U still lives on today. But for fans of Nintendo, it was kind of a dark time, because even having these great games that they could play, nobody was buying the Wii U. So let's go from 2012 to 2013, and let's talk about DRM, starting with SimCity. If you guys can remember, SimCity launched, and it had such atrocious DRM and had that origin connection. Fans of the series really ended up feeling let down and disappointed by what this SimCity was trying to be, and ultimately, Obviously, looking forward, we have not yet seen a follow-up, a true follow-up to the SimCity franchise. Everything has moved over to The Sims. EA seems to have kind of moved on from SimCity itself. But who can also forget Aliens Colonel Marines in this case? Launching, lots of hype, ultimately just filled with bugs, lots of frustration, and it started to really kind of crack the idea of Gearbox. Now, ultimately, I think the game ended up being hacked later and a couple of lines of code fixed, and people said that, wow, that actually fixes the game. It actually makes it a lot of fun. So there was some hope there. It just always sucks when something misses the mark, and Aliens Colonel Marines makes the highlight for 2013. And then finally, who can forget, obviously, the launch of the Xbox One? In this case, marketing issues aside, Microsoft's arrogance really gave the PlayStation the early lead that it has yet to recover from. Still to this day, players remember E3, they remember what Microsoft said, and they still quote it, even though they have shifted their plans today. So you cannot look at 2013 and say that it wasn't a tough year for Microsoft. Thankfully, and hopefully, we'll start to see more things, better things for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Scarlet as we go into 2020. Highlights for 2013, though, were Grand Theft Auto 5, The Last of Us, BioShock Infinite, Super Mario 3D World, and Fire Emblem Awakening. A lot of really good games for 2013 to kind of help take off the sting from some of these issues in 2013 as well. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on to 2014, in which that we have one game for you here as a part of our list. Assassin's Creed Unity. Lots of bugs, lots of memes, so much promise, but it failed to deliver on so many levels. And while the game continued to get patches, ultimately it was abandoned, and the Unity brand of Assassin's Creed pretty much we have yet to see it again, and ultimately it ended up leading Assassin's Creed to take a couple of years off while the teams retooled and refigured out what they wanted to release. Lots of people were disappointed in this release ultimately, and and it just led to people feeling that these games, the mindset that they're going to get patched after the fact. This is something that has been going on, but this seemed to be more and more prevalent, and it really led to more and more gamer fatigue to this concept that still continues to this day. So some highlights for 2014. Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U. Despite Wii U sales, still an incredible game. Dark Souls 2, Bayonetta 2, and Diablo 3 Ultimate Evil Edition launching on consoles to highlight the year for 2014. Now let's go ahead and move into the year 2015, and this is really a year of hype and disappointment. We're going to start with The Order 1886. While there are definitely fans of this game, and this was definitely a pinnacle piece for the PlayStation 4, ultimately it didn't match the hype that gamers had for it. And that's something we see often within the gaming industry. Sometimes hype does not match up to what is released. Now, it came out with mixed reviews. Sales overall were mixed, and some players really found it enjoyable, but it does make that list because I didn't live up to hype. Then we have Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, really the death nail in the Tony Hawk series, ultimately unfinished, a buggy mess that really left players and fans of the Tony Hawk skating series very disappointed, and we haven't really seen skating games recover since then. Hopefully we'll see, and maybe there's still a market for that here in 2020 and beyond, but we'll have to wait and see if skating can recover in the game space. So some highlights for 2015 though. You've got Metal Gear Solid 5, The Witcher 3, Bloodborne, Undertale, and Shovel Knight. So a lot of really exciting stuff happening in 2015 as well, and with that, let's move into 2016. With Mighty No. 9 and No Man's Sky. Again, No Man's Sky not delivering on the hype, but it does have a Cinderella story in which the developers continue to invest in the game, making it something worth playing here in 2019. So that's really exciting to see. Mighty No. 9 left players continuing to wait for a good Mega Man game, which they'd have to wait 2 more years for Mega Man 11. It was really unfortunate what happened with Mighty No. 9. It looked very promising, and overall was one of those Kickstarter games that failed to deliver, which seems to be sometimes a theme when it comes to Kickstarter. Not all the time, though. And so some highlights for 2016 were Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, Inside, Overwatch, and Forza Horizon 3, some of the top-rated games of that year. Let's dive in to 2017, and this is an interesting year. We've got a couple of games to highlight. Mass Effect Andromeda, Middle-earth Shadow of War, Star Wars Battlefront 2, and Destiny 2. We're going to call it Curse of Osiris. In this case, we also have the question of where are all the Xbox exclusives? If you're going to rate any year in in the last decade, what is the best or worst year for gaming? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll give you my opinion here in just a minute. Regarding Mass Effect Andromeda, while they continue to try and patch it, eventually they gave up all their DLC plans for this franchise, and Mass Effect being so beloved, this Andromeda follow-up left a lot to be desired. It was clunky, it had issues, it was memed to the ground, and left players really disappointed and wondering what is going on with BioWare. Follow-ups in years to come continue to feed into that narrative that there is an issue over at BioWare, so we'll talk about that here in a second. Anyhow, Middle-earth Shadow of War, what can you say about it? Repeatable mechanics overused and heavy microtransactions. This is just another nail in the coffin when it comes to gamers being frustrated at microtransactions over the course of the last decade. It seemed to get worse as the decade rolled on. And nothing can highlight better than this, than the Star Wars Battlefront 2 loot boxes for progression. Just the frustration that was tied behind this hype of a game literally changed the face of gaming from 2017 and beyond. Also, it doesn't help that Destiny 2 Curse of Osiris launched with a great level of frustration. It felt like gaming at the end of 2017 was at an all-time low. 2018 didn't help it out at all, but let's go ahead and talk about some highlights for 2017 so we can get the bad taste out of our mouth. You had The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, Divinity Original Sin 2, Persona 5, What Remains of Edith Finch, Mario Kart 8, Nier Automata, and Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood, raking in some of the top rated reviews for 2017. Now, let's go ahead and dive into 2018, and we're going to have to talk about a game that continues to be memed and frustrated gaming or gamers all around, and that's Fallout 76. And it doesn't get better in 2019. It's actually listed as a part of 2019, but we'll get to that here in a minute. You also have the follow-up to Metal Gear Survive, which left fans frustrated and ultimately disappointed. You also have Square Enix releasing a very odd game, The Quiet Man, which was announced, released, and just trashed. So just forget about it. And then finally, you have ending up Blizzard memeing itself into the ground with Immortal and Don't You Have Phones, and that ends up kicking off kind of their descent or their frustration that leads into 2019. But before we talk about 2019, let's talk about some highlights to get the bad taste of 2018 out of our mouths. You've got Red Dead Redemption 2, God of War, Celeste, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Forza Horizon 4, Dead Cells, Monster Hunter World, Sonic Mania Plus, and Destiny 2 Forsaken making the list of some of the top rated games for 2018. Lots of good stuff coming up. And now we go into the last year of this decade, 2019. 2019 started off with the failure of Anthem. It was such a frustrating time. Everybody here right now can easily remember what happened and what failed. Now, you also still have Fallout 76 on this list, continuing to get updates and also continuing to feel like they're screwing over gamers with, hey, we're not going to do this. But wait, we are. Psych. Forget about it like, oh, I didn't say that. Don't look that up. Anyway, you also have the disappointment of Crackdown 3. Crackdown 3, another game long in development. Looks like Microsoft finally said it's going to be what it is. And unfortunately, it couldn't live up to what people who really enjoyed Crackdown 1 wanted it to be. You then also have the story of Crackdown 2. I think Crackdown 3 probably signals the end of the Crackdown series. Couldn't live up to just what people wanted for 1, 2, and 3 ended up taking a long time, especially 3. Constant reworks, lots of delays, and eventually it was just released on the public. And then finally, for the biggest or the worst story of 2019, Activision Blizzard fires over 800 people and bends the knee to China. This led into, obviously, BlizzCon, and despite the fact that they've apologized, obviously gamers are still frustrated and also excited about things to come, but most of their games seem to be pointing to 2020 and beyond. So we'll have to see how Blizzard can do in the next decade, and it's unfortunate that the last 2 years they seem to be kind of stepping on their own feet. So, some highlights for 2019. Resident Evil 2 Remake, Shiriko Shadows Die Twice, Shadowbringers for Final Fantasy XIV, big fan of that game, shocker. Dragon Quest XI S being the highest rated version of the Dragon Quest game that had released. It actually came out in 2018 on PC, incredible game, but we're going to list it here in 2019. Disco Elysium, Tetris Effect, and finally Ori and the Blind Forest Definitive Edition for Nintendo Switch. Lots of really good games this year. There's been a ton of great games over the last decade, but plenty of stories that obviously leave us hoping for a brighter future in 2020 and beyond. So what was the worst year in gaming in the last decade? Personally, I would have to say 2017. 2017 marked kind of an apex point in the industry, coming off of just gamers being frustrated with hype and disappointment You still have, obviously, no Xbox exclusives. You still have microtransactions out the wazoo. You still have Star Wars Battlefront 2. And seemingly, like, that event still permeates today. EA has been on a very, I guess, gamer bad list. And that then ties into Activision Blizzard and more of these big companies, and the concept and the word greed continues to be thrown around within the gaming space. Now, that doesn't mean that these games aren't popular. That doesn't mean that these games aren't selling well. It just means that these are some of the most disappointing stories of the last decade. But those are just my opinion. That's what's happened over the last 10 years, and hopefully the next 10 years are going to be bigger, brighter, and better for all of us to come. So let's have some hope and let's ring in the new year. I'd love to know what you think. Were there any games on this list that you disagreed with? Were there any games on this list or not on this list that you felt like it should be? Do you feel like some of the highlights for the last decade for the games are missing anything? Let me know in the comments below. What do you think is the worst year of the last 10? What do you think is the best year of the last 10 years? Sound off in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. We really hope that you hang out here with us at the Workforce, where we like to talk about anything and everything video games, especially RPGs and MMORPGs specifically, as you can tell as I smile every time I talk about an MMORPG. But with that, I thank you so much for watching this video. I hope to see you in my next video. But until then, take care.